What is up, ladies and gentlemen? My name is Scott, welcome back to FudgeMuppet, and today I present to you a brand new Skyrim build. Recently, I've been watching the Netflix Castlevania series, and it got me in a real vampire type of mood, so I thought I'd jump onto Skyrim and see if there was anything new we could bring to the table in terms of a vampire build. The illusion, sneaky, speechy type vampire has been done and dusted. We've even done warrior type vampire builds. So I had an idea. I personally love the concept of blood magic, but it seems only limited to vampire lord form or low tier vampiric drain spells, but with a combination of mods we can make a complete blood sorcerer build not only viable, but absolutely devastating. Equilibrium has always been a fascinating spell for me, draining health to supply you with more magicka, and this blood sorcerer build makes full use of this unique power. Ladies and gentlemen, get excited because I'm about to present to you a fresh take on the vampire experience and an exhilarating playstyle that will give you the feeling of being a god tier vampire like Dracula, one that has no need of mortal weapons. But before we dive into the Blood Sorcerer, I want to let you know that we've been fortunate enough to have a sponsor for this video. You've probably never heard of Raid Shadow Legends, a popular mobile RPG that is all about building your team of champions. You can use the links below to download Raid not only on mobile, but also on PC. In Raid, each champion comes from a unique faction with its own lore. The first faction you meet are the Bannerlords, based on the feudal knights of medieval Europe, but with quite a bit more flair. Long ago, their ancestors fell into the complacency that comes with prosperity and indulgence. When hordes of skinwalkers, ogren, and orcs came to their doorstep, they were easily slaughtered. One powerful knight would go on to unite an army under his banner and fight against the hordes in the Battle of the Crimson Plains. He won and was crowned king. The king's descendants still rule, and the Bannerlords are their army, fighting to protect the realm and the crown. In addition to the lore, there are also lots of cool champion designs that you can just get lost looking at. I also like the strategic aspect of choosing champions with certain powers to make the best team for a campaign level, or to survive longer against a clan boss. For clans, you'll want your friends' usernames, and you can find me as FudgeKiller. This month there's a new rotation of the Doom Tower and a bunch of new champions coming out as always, so don't miss out. Click the link in the description and you'll begin with an epic hero, Chinoru, as well as 2,000 silver, 1 XP boost, 1 energy refill, and 1 ancient shard, so you can summon an awesome champion straight away. You can find all the treasure up here. But with that out of the way, let's delve into the backstory. Our story begins in the Deathlands of ancient Hammerfell, the sun-baked Craglorn region, the home of the Durakineeds and their civilization of skilled stonemasons who crafted bustling cities and ancient towers. The Blood Sorcerer, as he would one day be known, was born in the 416th year of the First Era, the same year that the Nords had finally been driven out of Resdayn due to the Dwemer and Khymer alliance. Like his parents before him, he followed in the trade of masonry and became quite the accomplished craftsman. First, he mastered stone, then he mastered steel, and then it would not be long before he sought the arts of magic to develop his crafts further. Smithing, enchanting, masonry, all crafts useful to the Durakineeds who were in need of walls, weapons, and any edge that could be used against their enemies, such as the Iron Orcs or the Aelids, who encroached on their territory, and in years to come, so would the Dwemer. During the year of his birth and the formation of the First Council in Resdayn, the Dwemer clan Rorken shunned the new alliance and instead began an exodus to a new land, one that they would call Völunnfell. For all his childhood, tensions had been high with the newly arrived Dwemer clan, but as an adult, his fear turned to curiosity after seeing their automatons in action. The young blood sorcerer's curiosity was piqued, and so he sought them out. At first, he was met with near hostility, but he managed to befriend a Dwemer named Chadak. Chadak was a master artificer and appreciated the curiosity of the Blood Sorcerer, as well as the fact that he was not dogmatic about matters of culture and faith. He spent many years learning under Chadak, and his craftsmanship improved immensely. Though the Blood Sorcerer was intrigued by Chadak's tales of other lands, and his thirst for knowledge sent him to foreign places, he went north to High Rock and witnessed the rule of the Serenni, as well as the unique Breton people, the men who have retained magical prowess from interbreeding with elves. He saw the Isle of Balfiera and the adamantine tower atop it, a divine marvel for anyone, let alone one who is enthusiastic about the art of masonry. Although he was curious about the world, the Blood Sorcerer could not spend all his years sightseeing. He had to return to his home, to his family, his friends, his duties, and his craft. While traipsing through northern Hammerfell on his way home to Skyreach, the Blood Sorcerer found himself met by a traveller who joined him by the campfire. This stranger possessed the most unusual eyes, and he looked malnourished, yet he declined the offer of any food. But he was incredibly friendly, and the young Blood Sorcerer loved a chance for some conversation, especially since he had been on the lone road for days. The stranger introduced himself as Anthotus, and as they talked, the two found a common intellectual appreciation for one another. Their conversation drifted from topic to topic, stirring all kinds of philosophical debate and lines of existential questioning, a dialogue that continued for many hours into the night. Upon realizing the length of their discussion, the Blood Sorcerer insisted that he must get some rest, for he had travels the next day, and Anthotus agreed, thanking him for the time. The Blood Sorcerer stood and went to shake his hand, but in a sudden motion, a pull of the arm, and a gripping embrace, the Blood Sorcerer was at the mercy of pearl-white fangs sinking into his neck. After taking his fill of blood, Anthotus smiled at his fading victim, winking and uttering the words, "A gift for a like mind," before vanishing into the night. This Anthotus was the progenitor of the Anthotus bloodline of vampires, those who were blessed with great intellect and would come to dominate regions of Hammerfell for thousands of years. The Blood Sorcerer awoke in the mid-morning sun, unsure if what had transpired was a dream or reality. By necessity, he continued his travels home to Skyreach, at times feeling sick when he ate food, and his dreams at night were horrifying, but he eventually arrived home safe. His family were ecstatic to see him, and they got preparing a feast, inviting friends and neighbors. Yet the Blood Sorcerer fell sick and was made bedridden. For days he was in agony during waking hours, while trembling with fear in his dreams, until one evening where he awakened as a vampire. His family recognized him for a creature of the dark, and terrified of being turned themselves, they reacted violently, despite the pleas of the Blood Sorcerer. He ended up bruised and battered, being chased out, nearly killed by a mob of friends, family, and neighbors who named him a demon. The Blood Sorcerer, with nowhere else to go, sought out Chaddak, his old Dwemer friend. Chaddak took him in and protected him as a true friend would, yet he recognized that he could not keep a vampire amongst his community, and so he takes the Blood Sorcerer to a remote location. It took the Blood Sorcerer a great many months to come to terms with his newly acquired condition, but ever the optimist, Chaddak soon convinced him of the benefits that this immortality may bring. He now has all of time to master his craft. The Blood Sorcerer found comfort in this, and began a brand new project in this remote location, a castle. One that combines the legendary masonry of the Duraaki Needs and the marvel of Dwemer machinery. He spent decades, 100 years, more, constructing in secret this wondrous castle, complete with elevators and steam-powered conveniences, and a newfound mastery of destruction magic allowed him to harness lightning in many unique inventions. The most unique feature of his castle was that it could teleport through the realms of Oblivion and reappear in new locations of Tamriel. This was done with a combination of tonal architecture and enchantments, and it fulfilled the Blood Sorcerer's desires to see other areas of Tamriel and experience new things, despite being a vampire restrained to a life as an outcast. His castle gave him both security and access to the world. In this age, there would be local folk tales appearing throughout Tamriel about a castle with a mysterious lord that would vanish only to reappear years later. As the years passed, he maintained a very close relationship with his Dwemer friend and mentor, Chaddak. But even elves do not live forever, and one day he would die of age. The day of Chaddak's death would bring him terrible grief. The artificer was his only friend and his only sanity. Over a century would pass as he travelled Tamriel and the plains of Oblivion in his castle, always returning to home in Hammerfell. He was always drawn back. One day, though, a woman knocked on the door of his castle, despite the staked bandits lining the path to its entrance. The bloody sorcerer answered to find a young Dwemer woman who wished to see his castle from the inside. She explained that her grandfather Chadak had a secret friend in a moving castle. Growing up, she thought it was just a story, but clues fell into place and she deduced the truth of the matter. And so, she had to see for herself. As Sancha was her name, as curious and intellectual as her grandfather before her, the Blood Sorcerer found himself giving her days, weeks, months of his time, talking, teaching, and eventually loving her. He stopped traveling in his castle, and he stayed with her, spent all of his days with her, and despite his status as a vampire, she loved him. This was the greatest his life had ever been, yet due to circumstances outside of his control, it would not last forever. It is the 700th year of the First Era. In the east, the Battle of Red Mountain was undergoing, and at its climax, the race of the Dwemer would simultaneously disappear, including Clan Rorken of Vollenfell. The Blood Sorcerer was embracing Azancha in his arms as she slowly faded to ash in front of him, the ashes themselves then evaporating into nothingness. The Blood Sorcerer screamed in agony. He searched the nearby Dwemer cities and not found a single person. And so began 100 years of grief. First it began with the search, decades of wandering Oblivion, scouring Tamriel to no avail. Then after returning to Hammerfell came decades of pain-swallowed stupor. Come the year 808 of the First Era, the Regarda, the warrior wave of Yakuran, sweep the land, claiming a new home. From survivors of local tribes of Needs and Beastfolk, tales of a demon lord in a moving castle circulate. A party of sword singers looking to prove their worth by felling a filthy undead foe tracked down the Blood Sorcerer's castle. The Blood Sorcerer hid in the shadows, striking out and draining life from the brazen warriors, picking them off one by one before being forced to face the remaining four in open combat. The battle is devastating and travels through the castle, culminating in a final fight that takes place in the navigation room. One sword singer remains, clearly the greatest of them. The Blood Sorcerer activates the castle and teleports it through Oblivion in order to disorient his foe. However, the Sword Singer takes wild swings with his Shihai in the confusion, which destroys part of the machinery. The castle begins malfunctioning and rumbling. Glass shatters and the Sword Singer is cast from the window, sent flailing into the void. The Blood Sorcerer, with no hope of saving the castle, enters his enchanted sarcophagus, which was made to withstand the destruction of this very castle in emergencies such as this. The castle is strewn apart, torn and flung to all corners of Oblivion, and yet a chunk survived, thrown to Tamriel. A chunk of the castle, within it the Blood Sorcerer, was teleported into the Velothi Mountains near Riften. Here, a section of the broken castle would stay for thousands of years, the Blood Sorcerer sealed within as eras go by. Come the year 200 of the Fourth Era, enterprising miners would accidentally discover it and open the sarcophagus containing the Blood Sorcerer. After being asleep for millennia, he was blood-starved and so instinctually drained everyone of their blood, not leaving a soul alive. The Blood Sorcerer would leave the mine and gather his bearings. It would take him some time to regain his abilities, having been dormant for so long, and he soon falls in with another group of vampires, temporary allies, while he recovers. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is where you will begin your story as the Blood Sorcerer. Now let's move on to the role-playing section where we talk quest lines, factions and such. But just before that, I want to lay out some of the personality traits. As you could probably tell from the backstory, the Blood Sorcerer has a great respect for intellectual capacity and curiosity. When interacting with scholars, academics or mages, he would tend towards being respectful and curious. Yet on the flip side, he has a great disdain for boorish oafs that praise false gods and spend their days drinking and fighting. The warrior archetype is one that he has no respect for. The Blood Sorcerer is also completely fascinated by the Dwemer and their technology, and any quest involving Dwemer ruins, such as the Lost to the Ages questline, or Arniel's Endeavor, which involves research regarding the Dwemer disappearance, are go-to quests. The latter of which is of great personal interest to the Blood Sorcerer, given that his one and only love vanished because of the Dwemer disappearance. Pursuit of knowledge is of great importance for the Blood Sorcerer. Recovering the black books from the inky seas of Apocrypha would be valuable to his thirst for answers, as well as joining academic institutions such as the College of Winterhold. As you can probably imagine, the Blood Sorcerer will be joining the Volkihar vampires throughout the course of the Dawnguard DLC. Also, there is one mod I would like to mention, and that is the Volkihar Castle Rebuilt mod, which after finishing the questline allows you to clear the rubble and restore Volkihar Castle to its former glory, making it a desirable home for an ancient vampire. Now, I don't want to waste your time explaining every single one of the mods, and theoretically some of these are interchangeable with your preferences, but as a general rule I found myself appreciating the minimalistic Ination mods, and I will note that the Mysticism magic overhaul is very necessary for this build, but there is a list of the essential mods and we'll be referencing them as they factor into gameplay. They are also all linked in the description. Let's now discuss race, standing stone, stats, and all that kind of stuff. The Blood Sorcerer is an Imperial-born vampire. With the Morningstar Minimalist Races mod, his Imperial race is going to offer two passives. Quick Learner allows us to learn all skills 8% faster, which is going to come in handy with a decently broad skill set, and on top of that we're going to start the game with 2 additional perk points thanks to the ability Human Spirit. As for the vampire part, we use the Sacrilege Minimalist Vampire mod, which adds a whole host of changes to additional powers, Vampire Lord form, vampire ranks, passive abilities, and even disadvantages such as weakened divine blessings and others. The big difference with Sacrilege, or the more complex mod by the same author, Sacrosanct, is that it makes it so feeding increases your power and not feeding weakens you, making you beastly and blood-starved. Personally, I've always thought this makes more sense, but regardless, you can feasibly choose either of the two mods, and I highly suggest that you check out the mod page linked below because they are hella extensive and it would take a whole video to explain all of the changes. But just know that being a vampire with these mods is a different experience. For the Standing Stone, we are going to be picking the Shadow Stone, which increases movement speed by 20% in combat and also offers greater sneaking and sneak attack bonuses when near walls or obstacles, and we will be utilizing sneak occasionally as we need to feed and stalk our prey. As for stats, we're going to be going with a pretty even split of magicka and health till magicka hits about 300, and then honestly we can go way harder into health, as Equilibrium lets health function as a secondary magicka pool, plus our spells absorb health, so we can get some pretty crazy combos going on. Additionally, this crazy leech-like setup is bolstered by our worship with the Winter Sun mod. We choose Molag Bal as our patron, and his passive ability allows us to absorb a certain amount of magicka and stamina per second from nearby enemies in combat, the amount being based on your favor with him. Gaining favor with Molag Bal will be very easy for us, as his conditions are: slay people who stand in your way, trap souls in my name, live as a vampire and never seek a cure. Those skilled in destruction are most deserving of my favor. And as a destruction-wielding vampire who slays everyone who stands in their way, plus dabbles in a little soul trapping for his enchanting skill, I think you'll have an easy time getting some high favor, and hence plenty of magicka and stamina absorption. Let's now move on to how to fit out this character build, and then I'll explain how it all comes together, and we can run through the perks and skill specifics, finally culminating in the playstyle. The ideal look for this character is an ancient, affluent vampire. Think the vampire counts from Warhammer. We want a little bit of a Dracula feel here. So we ultimately want to be wearing the Ebony Knight armor acquired using the Nordwar UA mod that has been repackaged into a standalone edition, which is linked below. And as a powerful crafter, the Blood Sorcerer is going to maximize his armor rating via smithing, and he's going to enchant it with powerful effects. He'll wear a ring and necklace, really any is fine, enchanted with Fortify Destruction and Health, which reduces the burden of casting costs and increases his secondary magicka pool via the Equilibrium spell. His chest piece is enchanted with Fortify Health and Destruction for the same reasons. His gauntlets are enchanted with Fortify Magicka and Sneak. Remember, despite appearances, this character can move like the shadows if he must. And his boots will be enchanted with Resist Shock and Resist Fire, both of which bolster two areas that are not buffed, like Resist Frost due to the vampire status. Finally, I would like to recommend adding a cape of your choice this for a bit of fun and role-playing reasons. Here I use the black linen cape from the Cloaks and Capes mod, but to be honest, I actually like it as a sometimes thing. I think the ebony knight armor looks really cool on its own. As for spells, we do have some basic things like Vampiric Drain, which granted will be better than vanilla as it scales alongside your growth as a vampire with the mods we have. However, we really do depend on the Mysticism Magic Overhaul, which provides a host of spells that are essentially the same thing but varied in application. Spells like Entropic Touch, which is a touch drain health spell, Entropic Blast, which shoots a red like arc of health drain, or Death Field, which shoots forward an explosion of blood magic draining health, or even LeMay's Embrace, which essentially creates a cloak of health draining. These are great examples of late game spells, but rest assured there are apprentice and adept versions for the earlier game. So now we come to the skills and perks section, and I am sure given the backstory and all the previous gameplay sections, you would have worked out what a bunch of the skills are here, but let's re-clarify. The Blood Sorcerer uses Destruction, Heavy Armor, Sneak, Alteration, Enchanting, Smithing, and One-Handed. An interesting bunch of skills, but let me explain each of them and talk about their standout perks, and I will also show a list of total perks for all the skills. Okay, so let's get this one out of the way. The one-handed skill is ultimately an early game skill and a backup. We didn't even pick a particular sword for this character because ultimately you're going to be hands-free using only blood magic, but things like Harken's sword would fit really well, but really this is going to help you immensely before you have the equilibrium spell and before you have a giant pool of magicka and health. So we get some relatively basic perks for the one-handed tree, but honestly, I think it is a really cool development for this character to eventually become so powerful that they no longer need mortal weapons. Moving on to Destruction, this is the powerhouse core of this build, and interestingly, we do not have heaps of perks in this tree, due to most of it being focused on elemental magic. Dual casting and impact is there, bringing that useful stagger, and there is the useful raw power perk, which at 3 ranks increases non-elemental destruction spells damage by 30%. It's very straightforward in terms of perks, but by the gods is it effective. Now, Heavy Armor is where we go all in. We get every single perk because ultimately they beef us up and make us as tanky as possible, and we do play in melee range a lot, and plenty of these perks help immensely. Face of Death is a standout one purely so we can benefit from wearing no helmet, and specifically Face of the Mountain is pretty damn cool, making our vampire here so powerful that all incoming power attacks and bashes stagger the attacker with a 25% chance of knocking them down. You may be wondering why we have the You may also be wondering why we have Alteration on this list, since we don't really use any Alteration spells. Well, you've actually got to remember that Equilibrium is an Alteration spell, which we do use, and the Alteration skill tree is home to many passive benefits. Also, let it be known that you probably should use a little bit of cheeky telekinesis here and there, just to help boost your Alteration skill to get your hands on these juicy passive perks. The perks in question are Magic Resistance, which at 3 ranks gives you 30% resistance to magic, Atronach, which gives 30% spell absorption, and the Alter Self perk, which at 2 ranks gives us a 50-point bonus to an attribute, which I would recommend using on magicka to bump it up early in the game, and it also gives a 25% boost to 2 resistances, which we are going to choose Fire to help mitigate the vampire weakness, and Shock, which in combination with the boosts in those resistances from our Boots enchantment should give us a very sturdy resistance to all elements alongside our Vampiric Frost resistance. You may be wondering why we have Sneak, and well, we are a vampire after all, and we do have to feed, and no one ever said no to a strategic advantage. I found that playing this build I would often end up just raising my Sneak due to some of the scenarios I was in, so I may as well invest a few perks to make it easier to facilitate this side of the playstyle, even though primarily we are front on in battle. 2 ranks of silent movement is necessary to get rid of that heavy armor clunk, and light foot stops us from triggering pressure plates, which is basically just convenient, but both of these perks from a role-playing perspective really fit the vibe of a vampire who, despite appearances, is as silent as the night and light of foot. Also, the Shadowcaster perk makes it so destruction spells do twice as much damage against targets not detecting you. Given the backstory as a powerful craftsman, it would not make sense for smithing and enchanting to be missing from this character. Smithing perks are very straightforward, but they are necessary to create the armor we desire and buff it up appropriately. And of course, enchanting is needed to give us all of that cool enchanted gear, and once again very straightforward with perks, including ones concerned with adding extra effects or greater armor enchanting is the go, but there is nothing special for us to talk about here. Alright, so now it's time to sum it all up in the playstyle. Of course, throughout the duration of this video, you will have picked up on a lot by watching, but let's recap. Entering battle, it's wise to cast something like LeMay's Embrace, which will give you a cloak of health absorption, and thanks to Molag Bal worship, we will also have magicka and stamina absorption. So in one move, we are already leeching 3 attributes from our attackers. We now begin casting various blood magics like Entropic Touch, Entropic Blast, Hand of Sithis, or Death Field at our attackers, which is already returning abundant health for us. And if we ever do find our magicka is getting even remotely close to low, we can switch to equilibrium to essentially use our health as a way to restore magicka, which at the same time is self-sustaining because the spells cast return health. So it's this perfect cycle of losing and gaining blood in order to sustain untold destruction. I'm gonna be honest with you, early game can be a little bit tougher for this character, and you may have to rely on the sword a little bit, but there is a tipping point as you level up, where you essentially reach vampire god status, and it's oh so satisfying. One final note in regards to the vampire lord form, obviously this is something that you can choose to use, but for this character in particular, I enjoyed using the humanoid form more, but do as you wish. It's always fun to sometimes unleash the darker true form of a vampire. But that, ladies and gentlemen, is just about it. That's the Blood Sorcerer, our brand new take on a vampire build. I really hope you enjoyed this, and now you have something fresh to play Skyrim with for the 1000th time. I also absolutely recommend that you check out the Castlevania series on Netflix, which served as part of the inspiration for this build. It's just a really good series that I've enjoyed. Remember, links to the mods are in the description. Like the video if you enjoyed it, share it with your friends who are looking for a new way to play Skyrim. My name is Scott from FudgeMuppet, thanks so much for watching, and I'll be back to nerd out with you again next time.